Yeah, let's just get into it. My name is Nathan Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Nogs or on GitHub at NogsMPLS. The MPLS stands for Minneapolis because I love Minneapolis, and that is in part why I'm giving this talk today. Basically, I want to talk about how we, as software developers, can actually start giving back to our local communities and to charitable organizations to help better the society around us. And so you might be thinking, why the heck are you giving a talk about charity and nonprofits at a tech meetup? This is supposed to be about React. Why are you doing this? So to answer that question, I need everybody in this room to come to a realization about themselves. Because if you're in this room, you are probably either a software engineer or an aspiring software engineer. I know that we get a lot of boot camp people here at our meetups. So the fact that you're in this you have this sort of skill set, or you're trying to get this certain specific skill set, and you're here at a React meetup, means that you fit a certain profile. And that is that you have to come to a realization that you and I and all of us here are Zool. Zool is the gatekeeper. I don't know if it's from Ghostbusters. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't seen Ghostbusters, I don't know. Enrique, come on. Go watch Ghostbusters. We're all Zool. We're all gatekeepers. And what I mean by that is us, along with our cousins in IT, basically hold the keys to the largest e-commerce and communications channel that humanity has ever seen. It's called the internet, right? And if you want to get anything off of the internet or up to the internet, at some point in that process, you have to go through us. So we have this immense power and this immense, I think, responsibility that we have to recognize. And also, it's completely unregulated, right? We can do whatever we want on the internet, and we can use that power, unfortunately, to exploit people and take advantage of them. And if you do that, you end up being this guy, basically. You get mad with power, you start doing ransomware, you start installing malware on people's computers, all sorts of crazy, horrible stuff. We don't want to be this guy. This is from Star Wars, Emperor Palpatine. Anybody who hasn't seen Star Wars, there's a movie coming out tonight. Go see that. This whole thing's actually just a way for me to promote a bunch of pop culture films. So we don't want to be this guy. Instead, we want to try and heed the advice of Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, that with great power comes great responsibility. I really believe this in a lot of ways. And we need to start taking that power and applying it to good. We want to be good, or at worst, we want to be neutral, right? We do not want to be bad. And so I think that's a pretty easy message to get across: do good, right? How do I think we can do good? Well, I think we can do good by donating our skill sets and our knowledge as software engineers to nonprofits and charitable organizations. And the reason why I think that that's one of the best ways to actually do good in society is that nonprofits and charities fulfill a gap that is essential for civilized society. There are things that the government and the private sector will not do, but the nonprofit and charitable area of our society will actually fulfill. One thing, for an example, is something like battered women's shelters, right? Victims of domestic abuse. They provide shelter for these victims. This is something that I can't find anybody who thinks that this is something that we shouldn't have. We should have these. They should be readily available for victims. And yet, it's not something that government provides, and the private sector will never go into that because they're nonprofit, right? Now, it's true that they do have to grant writing to try and get funding from the government, but depending on political climates and whatnot, it can be very sporadic how they get their funding and how they do their budgets year from year. And the most reliable way that they actually are able to budget is through volunteers and donations. The only way that we are able to fulfill that gap that these nonprofits provide, these social services that are absolutely necessary, is through our own actions. They are, by their nature, grassroots. So how can we actually help nonprofits and charitable organizations? I think there are three primary ways, and don't get technical on me that the last two are technically in a way the same, but the first way is just through money, right? Just donating money to a cause that you believe in. This is one of the easiest and quickest ways to actually make a difference in your community. And as software engineers, when compared to the rest of the labor force in the nation, we also have to realize that maybe not you in particular, but in a very broad sense, we generally make a bit more money than a lot of the other people in the labor force. And so we have a bit more disposable income. Obviously, individual situations vary, but in a big, broad sense, that's true. And so that's one of the ways that we, just by the fact that we have the jobs we have, are able to immediately start to help out our communities. The second way is just through volunteering your time. This is a very common way of helping out an organization, and basically just going and volunteering. It's one way that you can have a completely direct impact. It could be something as simple as helping someone get to a health clinic that they didn't have transportation for because they either lived hundreds of miles away or it's negative 20 degrees and they can't go wait out for a bus, but they need to make an appointment and they don't have a car. Something as simple as that, or wrapping up gifts to eventually be handed to low-income families so they can have a Christmas. Things like volunteering that way is a way to have a really personal and direct engagement into the cause that you believe in. But the thing I want to talk about most today is actually donating our skills, right? What makes this room unique compared to many of the other people in our society is that we have a skill set and a certain power that a lot of people don't have. And nonprofits in particular do not have any kind of budget in order to afford our services in general. There was a study that I found that came out in 2014 that said that the average nonprofit budgeted, their annual yearly budget had about 3.2% was dedicated toward technology. That's nothing. That's computers, that's telephones, that's networking, that's subscription services, it's Outlook, that's if they have a designer or whatever, like Adobe subscription, it's everything you can possibly think of, hosting, domain names, everything, 3.2%. And I suspect, and this is just pure speculation on my point, I suspect that is actually higher than what is the actual for the majority of nonprofits, because there are a few really big players that sort of screw with those numbers a little bit, like Red Cross and whatnot. And I think technically the NFL is a nonprofit, which is ridiculous. So I actually think it's less than 3.2%, and it's actually not unheard of. You can probably think of a cause that you might believe in, whether that has to do with animals or nature preservation or whatever. There's probably a nonprofit in Minnesota somewhere that tries to tackle that cause in some shape or form with a yearly budget of probably under $50,000. At that point, it's a completely volunteer-driven organization. You can't do anything with $50,000 per year and try and actually purchase computers or hire a web developer of any kind. So I hope I've communicated why we should do something, why we should help nonprofits, and why they need us. But if you're still thinking, what's in it for me? There's a lot that can actually be in it for you. There's a lot of opportunities for you to expand your own experience and your career. First and foremost, I think it looks great on a resume. I know people say everything looks great on a resume, but I really do. I think it's a way for you to continue coding, continue and further your experience with possibly new technologies and get something up into production, but at the same time, show on your resume that you're not just code. You're not just a programmer. You actually have something that you believe in. You have a passion that you have donated time to, and you've used your particular skill set to help it. I think that stands out on a resume more so than just another job. I think that, and I think in the job searching, when you're job searching, anything that makes you stand out in any way is a good thing. Like I said, it's a chance to try out new technology, React, right? And I'll get into why I think React is in particularly a good fit for this type of work. You get to learn the IT side of things. It's not uncommon for a UI developer to immediately get a job at like a corporation right out of boot camp or college or whatever, and never actually have to deploy anything to production. It's all done locally, and you just commit to a repository up, and then somebody else actually makes it all go live and maintains and gets the calls whenever stuff goes down. That's actually pretty common. This actually gives you experience of actually getting a server up, knowing how to get your code into production, and how to maintain that up like live while visitors come in. And you're probably going to have a fire or two because something will probably go down. And that's valuable experience that I'm sure there are plenty of people here that have experienced that, but I think there's a not insignificant amount of you probably haven't. And so that's a really, really valuable lesson. There's some really valuable lessons to learn in that whole process. So I hope I've made my case for what you can get out of it and why we should even be doing this. So now I want to go and transition into some sage advice that I have that I've gotten through volunteering my skill sets myself towards a nonprofit, and also a little bit from my past freelancing career, because there's a lot of parallels. If you're still sitting here and I still haven't made the case for you, just replace the words nonprofit and charitable organization with small business and mom and pop retail store or whatever, because they face a lot of the same issues in regards to budget and how you would engage them, and talk about specific problems and how you should, make your relationships with them. So first I'm going to talk about soft skills. I don't know why they're called soft skills, but it's basically just what do you do socially, actually? How do you actually start this conversation with a nonprofit, and how you should handle it? And these are 4 key points that when I was thinking about what to talk about, that I came up with. The first one is patience and empathy. And then realizing that intent is great, but follow through is better. That you have to meet in person, and setting up proper expectations. I think, like I said, this isn't necessarily profit specific. If you can do these things in your professional career, you will see a lot of good things come out of it. But there are some tricky things with nonprofits and charitable organizations in particular that make these things very important. So first off, there are some nonprofits that are entirely volunteer driven. It's basically a second job for them. So they value their free time a lot. They're not going to be checking their email like we do, or even be on their phone all the time checking Slack at all hours of the night. Like, they value their free time and they unplug because they do a full-time job and then they run a nonprofit on the side. And they have to make sure that they have their priorities in line so that they can serve whatever their cause may be. And with that in mind, we have to recognize that depending on the sector that the nonprofit works in, seasonal or political changes can actually greatly affect their ability to communicate with you as they triage their priorities. And so I experienced this myself. The nonprofit that I am working with is called Family Tree Clinic, and they provide health services for the underinsured and people that have absolutely no insurance. And so right after the election, they ended up serving for about a week and a half straight. They ended up serving the same amount of people that they normally serve in 1 month in 1 day for a week and a half straight. they had much bigger fish to fry during that period than whatever website I'm making for them, right? And they didn't talk to me. I didn't really know what was going on. And I just had the feeling like, okay, they must be doing something very important because they are doing very important work. So I didn't bug them too much. I pinged them a couple times, but I did it in such a way that I didn't want it to come off that I was upset in any way. And it's something that you'll have to learn, that they are not going to necessarily be as not as good at communicating as you might be used to in your professional careers, where people are just pinging back emails usually pretty quickly or responding on instant messengers. They're not going to be doing that, especially when something like this happens. They have much, much bigger fish to fry. Their priority should be serving patients to their best of their ability, not seeing like, I need an image. Give me an image. That doesn't matter at that point in time. They also might not be as technically literate as you. In fact, I'd say there's a very, very, very good chance they're not going to be as technically literate as you. I got a little lucky in that the person that my direct contact, who's actually on the board, I think, board or she runs it, she actually ended up redoing the Family Tree Clinic site about a year ago all on her own. And she actually did a really good job. I didn't actually have to touch that site in particular. But the fact that she's like running the place and doing the website like on the side when she comes in, like, it's ridiculous. But I didn't have that problem. I'm able to talk tech with her pretty well. But it's going to be pretty common that they're not going to understand what you're talking about. And it's going to be very common for them to suggest things that are probably impossible. So when I first started communicating with Family Tree Clinic, they got really excited about having a developer that was willing to donate some time. But they started throwing around some ideas for like, oh, it'd be great if we could text patients their results after they've come in. And I was like, that is a cool, great idea. I love the passion, but I don't know HIPAA law. I don't know the regulations. And if I'm doing this by myself, I'm not sure if I am good enough to know every security hole that might be there. So I was like, that's great. I can't do that. Don't want to touch sensitive medical user records, but I can do X, Y, and Z. I can do these other things. And then start the conversation from that angle. So don't get upset when they start throwing out all these crazy ideas and you're like, that's never going to happen. Don't laugh at them, right? You might want to, but don't. Have empathy, understand their position, know that they don't really know what they're asking for a lot of the times. It's up to you to help educate them on what your abilities and your skill set is and what you can actually help. And so the way you do that is actually listening to their pitch, listening to what they have to say about their organization, find the pain points, find the gaps, and figure out how technology can assist them. Also, reliability is much, much more important than intent for nonprofits. If you and a bunch of friends get together and do a 24-hour like dev jam for a nonprofit, and you're like, we're just gonna have a bunch of fun, drink some beers, create a website, do a prototype, hand it off to the nonprofit, and the nonprofit's gonna be, sweet, I got this thing for a bunch of devs. Except that it only kind of works. It's got a list of bugs and a bunch of half-working features that they've now got this thing that they thought they were getting for free, and they didn't budget for because they thought it was pro bono, rightfully so, because that's what you said it would be. But now they've got this half-working app or site that they now have to turn around and actually find somebody in this room and pay them money to fix it, and now they're in the red, they didn't budget it, and now they've got a funding problem. It's much, much more important. Like, providing half a service is more costly and worse than providing no service at all. So if there's one thing, I'm gonna get a little hard on you guys here right now, but if there's one thing you do, follow through. You cannot back out halfway through this. You must see it through, because these people are helping our communities, and if you hurt them, you hurt your community. Follow through. Just bang it into you. And in that line, again, don't bite off more than you can chew. Know your limits, but also try and figure out ways to learn while doing this work. Meeting in person is super, super important. Any sales guy will tell you this. While we live in the digital age, you have to meet in person at least once, at least for that initial conversation. It builds trust. When you look someone in the eyes and say, I will do something for you, and you are going to more likely finish that project, and they're more likely to be responsive to you as well. They're never, again, these aren't technical people for the most part. They're never going to give you the time of day if you don't set up an in-person meeting. My preferred method of communicating is Slack, Messenger, text, email. I don't like talking in person and doing sales pitches. I've done it before, and I'll do it again, but it's not my preferred way of communicating, but it's absolutely necessary. You have to meet in person and set up that relationship. Digital communication is great for asset transfer and clarification questions, and maybe afterwards, keeping the relationship going, but definitely meet in person. You cannot just find your nonprofit that you like, shoot off an email and expect them to respond. You're gonna have to really hammer on them because again, they have other priorities right now, possibly.
You find phone calls are kind of a middle ground.
Phone calls can be, yeah, so a phone call, so depending on the nonprofit, they may have an email, they may not. That's one thing that we can do to help a lot of places around here is a lot of them don't even have a form on their website. It's super easy that we can just go in and put a form, and that just helps them so much to get communicating and getting donations and actual funding from people in the community. Phone calls are a good middle ground. If you can get someone on the phone to set up a meeting in person, you're much, much more likely to get something. Again, phone is a bit more personal. That's a good point. If you can get them on the phone, definitely try and do that. Expectations, again, this is just good advice for your entire life for personal and professional relationships. Make sure both sides understand what is possible and what is not possible. They might ask for a ridiculous app that would take 10 people in 2 years. And you just gotta let them know it's out of reach, but also let them know what this is gonna cost them. Even though you're doing these services for free, there are things like asset acquisition, images and videos, there's hosting fees, domain name fees. There's a lot of hidden stuff in there that they might have to inherit once you're gone. So really try and think that through and let them know, because they are very, very I feel like more so than anybody in the private sector, the nonprofit areas are very, very money conscious because they have it's very limited and they only get to spend what they get from donations and through grant writing, and it's super sporadic. Okay, so what does this got to do with React? I'm getting there. We'll get there. Just give me 2 more minutes and we'll start talking about React. So we need to figure out what are the common needs that any of these places might have that we can help serve. So the top 2 bullets here, the static sites and content management systems, are probably going to cover 90% of anything you would need to do for a nonprofit. Static sites, microsites, this is probably what their actual website is. Just a 1, 5, 10-page website with a form on it. That's a very, very common use case. Or if they have a blog or something, maybe they need to actually have a CMS like a WordPress or whatever so they can actually self-administrate. Because again, if they can self-administrate, then that means they have less reliance on having to hire a web developer in the long term. Then you get into some of the more special cases. If people are really asking for this or really want this stuff, you're either going to be spending a lot more time or they're going to be a bigger organization. And that's stuff like web apps and mobile apps. Some things that I've seen floated around a lot are little mini games. There's a lot of nonprofits out there trying to engage in youth. And a lot of them have ideas of oh, we should make a little mobile game, an app game, and they're good ideas. Or anything like apps for donation drives, specific events that they might have. So like givemn.org has Give to the Max Day, right? So they might have, maybe they would want an app or something for specifically that event, that one big donation drive that they have. And whether that could be mobile or a web app. Questionnaire surveys, things like that. So let's see what the React community at large has come up with to sort of maybe help us out with some of these common needs. Firstly, for static sites, which is very, very common and probably what you'll do most of, I found two really good projects out there that I've been sort of going back and forth and testing out both of them, and they're both very good. The first one is Gatsby. It's by this guy named Kyle Matthews. He actually gave a talk at ReactConf this year, a lightning talk about Gatsby. I was one of the early contributors, and I helped fix some Windows issues. It's gotten pretty popular, so much so that Kyle Matthews has been able to, I think, be full-time Gatsby development. He's gotten donations and whatnot. And so basically what and Phenomic is by this guy named Muox, who I believe has been a pretty core contributor to post CSS and that whole, or maybe it was libsass. It was some node CSS thing. But both of these repositories, both of these projects, packages, allow you to create static sites through either HTML templates, React components, or markdown files. So you can literally just write a markdown file and it will create a static page for you, static content for you. It'll turn it, Webpack will turn it all into a React app and you serve it off to the server and it makes a static site for you. And the way they handle routing is actually pretty easy to understand for even non-technical people. It's basically your hierarchy, right? There's a pages directory for Gatsby, and as you create directories in there, that's your route. So while it's not a full-fledged content management system, depending on the site, it's actually not too difficult if you get things set up correctly with your styles and whatnot, to actually hand that off to a nonprofit and say, hey, all you gotta do is learn Markdown, which is a very, very simple, quote unquote, like markup language. And you guys can start updating your site yourselves. Same thing with Phenomic, allows you to do markdown files, HTML templates, and React components for visualizations. Check those projects out for static sites. Okay, so here's the kind of downer I feel. Self-administration with content management systems. This is a huge, huge need for just about anybody that has a website. Everybody here knows what WordPress is, right? I hope. We, as React developers, do not really have a good solution. There's really only one out there, and it's called Relax. And it's very much in beta. It's not where it should be, to be honest. And if there's one place for the React open source community at large to really improve, I think it's this space. I can't help but think that React itself and React components, just on a very surface level, it feels like it should be very pluggable, right? I should be able to have a system that, as long as we have standards around how props and state are handled, should be able to just plug in, grab a component, and put it into that system, not unlike a WordPress plugin, right? I haven't looked deeply into it, but I feel like that should be that should be possible. But we don't really have anything like that. That's like that has a full admin interface. There's Keystone.js by ThinkMill, which kind of gets you that admin interface, and their interface is built in React. But it still means you have to build the front end of it. It's a very interesting project. It allows you to build APIs, but also administrate a website. And you get to choose what you want for your actual front end, but it still has like a WordPressy admin back end. It's pretty interesting. So I think there might be potential for wrapping Keystone with like a front end, like a standardized front end of some kind for plugging in components. those are really the only two options right now that are kind of React specific. I think there's a lot of improvement here. And it's really unfortunate. I really wanted to be able to talk about a good content management system solution with React. Instead, what we have a lot of is a lot of these build an app from scratch repos. These are just probably the two most popular right now, but there are like 20 out there. There's Node Workbench and a bunch of others. So there's Create React App and Next.js. And what these things allow you to do is really bring up a prototype of an app very quickly and get a lot of the basic functionality, a lot of the configuration just done, easy, quote unquote easy. Create React Apps. Sam actually gave a talk a few months ago, actually the first React Minneapolis, about Create React Apps. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but the idea between these two are pretty much the same. Next.js is by Zit. I don't know how to say it. They've also come out with Now, which is for like easy deployment. You can kind of think of it, I think, as Heroku-ish, but by command line. I don't know. I've never used it. It has something to do with deployment. They also did Hyper Terminal. So Hyper, I don't know if any of you've heard of that. They've been pretty on the ball with some very, very like cutting edge stuff lately. And what Next does is I would see Next as like the next level up from Create React App. It has server-side rendering built in, and you just write a bunch of components. A lot of configuration is done for you. If any of you guys have ever tried to do server-side rendering with React, it's one thing that they like try and tout as you can do it, but it's actually pretty tough to do it on any significantly complex app. And Next can help you along with that and help you get up an app from scratch pretty quickly to help out a nonprofit. Sure.
Like with static apps, you're creating a CMS where the interface is probably email and the software is you, right? They're going to email you and say, by the way, this page doesn't seem right. It's your responsibility to go and make it right. And if you're using any experimental software, which all the React CMSs are,
yeah,
kind of the same thing, right? Like you have to be
right.
There's the CMS, and you just happen to have a few shortcuts.
Yeah, for this guy, for CMSs, yeah, there's a huge gap here. These are the only two that kind of try and tackle the CMS issue of self-administration. But I admit there is a big gap here. There is.
Be ready to be the person who will make whatever they want to happen. Or tell them that it's not, or
correct.
The error message that says that is not an available option.
Yes, yes. So yeah, if they're asking for certain features that there is either you aren't able to provide or you can't find a package that is able to provide it for you, then yeah, obviously, like I said, setting up expectations and having very good, clear, open communication is paramount. Yeah. This is the thing I'm actually most excited about is the multi-platformness of React. This is basically, I think, where React shines the most. And where we can really help nonprofits and charitable organizations. Two years ago, being able to be a one-person team and deploying to iOS and Android at the same time was incredibly rare. That's actually now possible with React Native. You can create an application that can be deployed to both platforms pretty easily. Yes, true, before there were things like PhoneGap and Cordova, and those still exist and they're great solutions for when you need to use it. But I still feel like, well, one, it's a React talk. I gotta talk about React. But I feel like React Native allows you to do a lot more with that. The other thing about React, and that's really cool, is that by having this virtual DOM, although I don't even know if we should call it a DOM anymore, by basically defining visuals, defining layout in memory, regardless of what it's actually rendering to, it's now allowed them, that's what allows them to do server-side rendering. But it now also allows them to render to VR. You guys heard about this? React VR? They announced it about a year ago, and it just came out. They just came out with a prototype like this week. React can render to VR. Like, you could make a VR app for a nonprofit. That's ridiculous, right? Like, you wouldn't have been able to do that ever, right? You have to have a very particular set of skills in order to do VR or desktop apps or iOS apps or Android apps. But now React itself and the team around it has started to bridge those gaps so that there can actually be one. It's not really one language. React Native is different than React that you would use for the web, but a lot of the concepts are similar. The way you would lay things out can be very similar. They're component-driven designs. And so I think this is actually something that's very, very cool about React, and I think it's amazing that it's started to lower the barrier so that nonprofits and charitable organizations can actually leap over it and start to get their cause out onto these new platforms and really widen their footprint so that people can understand why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, so that's why I think React in particular is good. There are some improvements that need to be made with the React community, particularly around CMSs. But overall, I think React actually has some really good solutions to help tackle a lot of the problems that are common with nonprofits and their web presence or their technology presence. So what's next, right? We all feel like we need to help now. I've inspired and motivated each and every one of you to go out and help, right? We know that it will benefit us. We kind of know how we need to handle the relationship aspect of talking with nonprofits, and we know why React is a good fit for this. So what's next? How do you find the nonprofit or charitable organization that you want to donate your skills to? So I want you to, first off, just try and think of anything that you like or feel passionate about. Or when you look at your community, what do you think is missing, right? Maybe it has something to do with bikes. Maybe you feel like there's just not enough bike paths. Maybe it has something to do with nature preservation. Maybe there's a lot of trash in your neighborhood that you want cleaned up, like physical trash to pick up. Maybe animals, pets, pet shelters. Maybe it has something to do with the queer community and helping them out. Or maybe it's a religious thing, right? Churches are nonprofits too. And there are a lot of small churches that need help as well. So that's just a splattering of possible avenues to go down. But really try and think about what you like, what you would like to see improved in your community, and what you might feel passionate about. And then go to these two websites, givemn.org, and then I made a short link for this, bit.ly/mn-non-profits. Both of those sites will give you lists of pretty much just about every single nonprofit in the state of Minnesota. The MN Nonprofits link goes to the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. And that is literally just a massive list of hundreds of nonprofits that you would need to sort of look up and just scroll through there, start reading some names, see what might stick out to you. GiveMN, I talked about Give to the Max Day earlier. That's a big event here that happens in November. That's through givemn.org. They have a search engine. It could use some of our help. But go there. You can actually start searching for causes. It's not just going to be a straight up list. You can actually search for what you're thinking of right now and see if there is an organization out there that might help with that. And even if you don't want to actually donate your skills or do any of that and actually, take time out of your weekend and do your free time. Some of us have kids, I understand, they're very busy. Everything I've talked about might not even be possible for you to provide. But if you go to givemn.org, you can give through givemn.org. You can donate money directly to any of those charities on there. And you can actually start to make a difference there. Again, money is one of the easiest and quickest ways for us to help improve our society. So that's all I have. Slides are at bit.ly/givingbackwithreact. Family Tree Clinic is where I'm donating my skills, and GiveMen and MN nonprofits are places where you can find more information about where to help and where you should put your skills. Any questions? Cool. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just throw this name right. It's a discussion topic.
Sure.
In my experience, usually what nonprofits need is an IT person. Right? They need someone to say like, oh, by the way, there's this service you can use for that. There's this thing you can use for that. You should solve WordPress. You should probably use WordPress. Don't, you know.
Right.
You should probably do all these things. You just need to understand how to use your account. Right? And that's a responsible answer. As a technologist, that's not, you know, I like to be helpful, but at a certain point I get bored. Right? I don't want to be the IT guy.
Right.
I want to actually build something.
Yeah, and
how do you navigate that?
well, again, I think you navigate that right up front, right? Setting expectations. So, you know, I said we're all Zool, but I also mentioned our cousins in IT. They're like Vin Clortho, who's the other monster. He's the key master. They also, if this was maybe a DevOps meetup, I would tilt the talk towards those type of things about.
Chef would also be a terrible answer.
Right. But you know what I mean, right? The reason I'm talking about web dev is this is React meetup. And in order to tackle a lot of those concerns that you brought up about them, maybe sucking your time away from web dev and into Outlook troubleshooting, is to let them know right up front, like I said, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. This is the service I can provide and I'm providing it for free. I do it professionally. Do you have ideas? I have ideas that I can present to you, but if you have anything that you think would be great, then let's do that if I'm able to do it. And then really really frame the whole thing around a project, because you're right, you might care about this cause now, but you might not in 2 years, you might not in 6 months, whatever. You do have to finish it. You don't start this without finishing it, but frame it. You know what I mean. But frame it as a project so that there is, if necessary, an quote unquote out whenever the scope has been accomplished. And try and make sure that all of your communication is around that project, so it doesn't creep into a lot of other things. Be as helpful as you can, but yes, definitely be aware that, again, they're not generally going to be as technically literate, so not on purpose and not maliciously, they will unconsciously possibly take advantage of you and your knowledge for things like you were talking about. I keep thinking of Outlook, but I can't think of another example off the top of my head. But you want to be helpful, right? Right. Exactly. Yes, exactly. And they don't, that's the whole point, is that they don't necessarily know what they're asking. It's up to you to educate them on what they're asking in as empathetic way as possible.
So 80 to 90% of what we talk about today is applicable to all of us. For a few of us who are guests, could you give the 60-second intro to React in particular? For those of us who are not familiar with React.
All right, 60 seconds.
And if
Who's got a clock?
Sell me on it, why I should use React.
For a nonprofit in particular, just use React, period.
In general, as opposed to all of my other.
All of your other choices. Well, I'll preface that with, well, I have to ask one qualifying question. Do you currently have a code base? Do you have a legacy code base, or is this a greenfield project? Greenfield? You don't, all right, you don't have a code base. This is brand new and you're wanting to make a website. React is great because it allows you to build reusable sections of your website. So unlike other technologies which use templating systems, which admittedly you can do reusable templates, but you have to really break that down in partials. There's not a really good frame in which to build those. React has that through React components. And that's sort of a first-class idea in React. And it allows you to build what's called, they're composable, right? So they're completely reusable, and they're loosely coupled with their parent components. And so you're able to build these really complex user interfaces by basically creating Lego building blocks. You're not creating, like with a template, a whole house. You're creating it brick by brick, right? Only you get to like do copy, paste, brick, copy, paste, brick, copy. You're not actually laying it yourself, right? So that's one of the things that as developers we've really come to appreciate with React is the way that you think about each part of your website can get really small down into scope. So you're really thinking about a small piece, and you do not have to worry about how it's going to affect necessarily things all the way over here, right? It only cares about this small piece and what's inside of it. So that's why I like it as far as developer experience, React itself. There's also a lot of benefits with the open source community. They've really come behind React. There's a lot of tooling that's come behind it that makes developing it in it even easier or cooler or better. There's things like Redux, which helps with state management. It allows you to actually do time traveling for like state management, so you can actually see the progress of how things go. There can be, yes. So that's a little wrinkle. What I like about React and multi-platform is that the concepts of building things through components and how those components are actually sort of used in the syntax between everything is all common throughout. But as of right now, there has been talk about trying to streamline this even more. But right now, the React framework you would use for a web browser and the React that you would use for a native app, whether that's iOS or Android, those are two different React frameworks. But the concepts of how you use both of those, they transfer over very, very much. Now the tiny little specifics, like you cannot copy paste code one-to-one from your web into your native, right? But the concepts of creating reusable button components and things like that are. The other thing that's kind of cool as an implementation detail about React that's really cool, I was talking about the virtual DOM. Basically, that creates a blueprint of whatever the visualization will be, whatever the UI is. So when you're talking about the browser, you're talking about the DOM. You can think of the DOM as basically HTML nodes, right? So what it's doing is it's building up the entire web page in memory, and then it sends that off to, it's not like old HTML where it sends it as a string through HTTP and the browser renders it. It builds up all of the HTML, all of the DOM in memory on the browser, and then it renders to the browser. So then anytime you make a change, anytime somebody inputs something or the site changes, it creates a copy of what was originally there, makes the changes, diffs them, and batches the changes so that it can optimally update the DOM itself. So there's a lot of out-of-the-box performance things that it does. That's not to say it's the fastest out there. They're definitely faster, but there's a lot of cool things. That virtual DOM is what allows them to do things like React VR and like build this concept of building up interfaces in memory without it actually being rendered yet. That was a lot longer than 60 seconds. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah. Sam, you had a question?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. One's about like hosting, and if you're trying to host a website, you're building a front-end website, often the question comes up, how are you going to host it? They're going to have to pay money, you're going to have to pay money. But there's a couple of resources out there that you're not aware of. One of them is obviously GitHub, which you probably are used to. You can do GitHub pages for free. All you have to have is a domain name.
Yep.
You can enter that into a GitHub repository.
You can mask it, free hosting.
The
Yep.
other thing that's out there is search.sh, which is a
super easy way to deploy a website for you as a front-end developer. Just a couple of commands, a command prompt, and bam, you can deploy it to a CDN around the world for free. So there's probably a ton more.
Yeah, now.
Keep those in mind. Now it's free as well.
Yeah, now it does like similar to search.sh, and that's by that Viet company that I was talking
You
about.
probably don't want to spend money unless you have to. And if you're doing front-end stuff, you don't have a lot of server-side processing. There's tons of free CDN type things out there, just like that. So use one of those or research some other ones.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start.
Yep. And go ahead. Surge.
SURGE.
Yep. G, yeah, Surge. Surge and Now, I think, are two of them out there. Yep. Yeah, and I think recently, I think in the past year, GoDaddy actually does Node now. They didn't do Node for a long time, and now they do. So GoDaddy can be an option as a common option. I don't necessarily like GoDaddy as a company, but it's so big, like everyone does it, so it's possible. Let's not get into it. Next question. Anything else? Great. Thank you so much for coming tonight.